What would you do if the very person who shattered your life, starved you, and left you to die on the freezing streets was suddenly at your mercy, and instead of demanding blood, you dropped to your knees to save them? A trembling girl, dressed in tattered clothes, sinks to the cold, wet gravel of the courtyard. Before her stand two terrified criminals, bound and cornered by the formidable Uncle Doong. Beside them, CEO Jack stands like a towering wall of absolute vengeance, his fists clenched, ready to lock them away forever. The police sirens are already wailing in the distance. The trap has snapped shut, and justice is seconds away. But just as the handcuffs are about to gleam in the dim light, a piercing cry cuts through the tension. The homeless girl doesn't point a finger of blame. Instead, she throws her fragile body between the criminals and the law, begging for the monsters who tortured her. Why would an innocent victim protect the people who destroyed her? Will Jack's burning rage override a broken soul's final plea? Or will Tu Tien find a way to heal a wound that runs deeper than blood? The answers unfolding in this dark courtyard will change the definition of family forever. The air in the old courtyard is thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and incoming rain. The silence is deafening, broken only by the rough, uneven breathing of two men pinned against the weathered brick wall. Uncle Doong stands over them, his broad shoulders squared, his grip on their wrists ironclad and unyielding. For weeks, these two men had moved like shadows, inflicting terror, leaving a trail of cruelty behind them. Now, caught like rats in a trap, their arrogance has completely vanished. They glance nervously toward the iron gates, listening to the faint, rhythmic thumping of their own racing hearts. Uncle Doong shifts his weight, his eyes flashing with the cold, hard discipline of a protector who has finally cornered his prey. He tightens his hold, forcing a sharp groan from the abusive husband. A few paces away, CEO Jack stands completely motionless. The expensive fabric of his dark coat catches the faint light, casting a long, intimidating shadow across the pavement. His face is a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. To Jack, the world is governed by order, consequences, and absolute justice. People who prey on the weak do not deserve mercy. They deserve the full, crushing weight of the law. His smartphone rests heavily in his palm, the screen glowing with the emergency digits already dialed. His thumb hovers over the call button. One press, and the lives of these two abusers are effectively over. Beside him, Tu Tien watches the scene unfold, her hands clasped tightly against her chest. She can feel the raw, pulsating anger radiating from her husband. She looks from Jack's rigid posture to the two men cowering on the ground, and then her gaze shifts to the corner of the yard. There, standing under the shadow of an old wooden awning, is the homeless girl. She looks so small, wrapped in an oversized, faded cardigan that belongs to someone else. Her shoulders are shaking. Her pale lips are parted in sheer disbelief. This is the moment she should be celebrating. The men who hunted her, who beat her and cast her out into the merciless elements like trash, are finally caught. Yet there is no joy in her eyes. There is only a deep, paralyzing terror. Suddenly, the fragile quiet shatters. With a breathless gasp, the homeless girl lunges forward. Her worn shoes scrape loudly against the stones as she stumbles across the yard. Before anyone can react, before Uncle Doong can even turn his head, she throws herself downward. Her knees hit the hard gravel with a sickening thud. She collapses right at Jack's feet, her small hands instantly reaching out to grab the hem of his coat. "Please," she sobs, her voice cracking, torn straight from the depths of a broken heart. "Please, Mr. Jack, Miss Tu Tien, I beg you, don't call the police, don't send them away." Jack freezes. His thumb stops a millimeter above the glowing screen. He stares down at the girl, his brows knitting together in utter bewilderment. For a second, the entire world seems to stop spinning. Uncle Doong's jaw drops, his grip loosening just enough for the two criminals to look up in stunned silence. They look at each other, then down at the girl they had so cruelly discarded, unable to comprehend what they are seeing. "What are you doing?" Jack's voice drops to a dangerous, low rumble. He steps back slightly, but the girl refuses to let go of his coat, her fingers locking onto the fabric with desperate, white-knuckled strength. "Look at them. Look at what they did to you. They hunted you down. They starved you. They treated you like you weren't human. And now you're begging for them? I know what they did." The girl screams through her tears, her head pressed almost completely against the cold ground. Tears stream down her dirt-smudged cheeks, leaving clean tracks through the dust on her skin. "They were cruel to me. They hurt me so much. But he is still my family. If you send them to prison, their lives are ruined forever. They will have nothing left. Please, I cannot bear to be the reason someone is locked in a cage. I cannot live with that guilt." Tu Tien steps forward, her heart breaking at the sight. She looks down at the girl, seeing a level of purity and compassion that defies all human logic. Little Anna, standing just behind her mother's skirt, peeks out with wide, innocent eyes. Seeing the young woman crying so bitterly, Anna's little face contorts with sadness. She tightly grips Tu Tien's dress, her tiny fingers trembling, reflecting the raw emotional weight filling the courtyard. Anna doesn't understand the complex nature of crime and punishment, but she understands pain. She buries her face into her mother's side, let out a soft, whimpering sigh that pierces through the heavy atmosphere. Jack, however, remains unyielding. His chest heaves as his anger flares brighter. "Family?" he scoffs, the word tasting like poison on his tongue. "A real family protects you. A real family cherishes you. These men are predators. If we let them walk away right now, what message does that send? They will think they can get away with anything. They will find you again, and next time, Uncle Doom might not be there to save you." The homeless girl looks up, her eyes red, swollen, and filled with an agonizing desperation. "Then let them hurt me. But please, don't do this. My life is already broken, Mr. Jack. If I carry the burden of sending them to jail, my soul will never find peace. I am begging you, look at me. Have mercy on them. For my sake, not theirs." The tension in the yard skyrockets. It is a clash of two unyielding forces: Jack's absolute, uncompromising justice versus the girl's radical, almost terrifying capacity for forgiveness. Standing near the edge of the veranda, Fook, Jack's loyal assistant, witnesses everything. Usually, Fook is a man of pure logistics. He deals in contracts, schedules, and cold, hard facts. He has seen the worst of humanity in the business world: greed, betrayal, and cutthroat malice. He expects people to strike back when they are wronged. But as he watches this frail, homeless girl kneel in the dirt, risking her own safety to shield the very monsters who broke her, something shifts deep inside his chest. He stares at her profile, his breath catching in his throat. He sees the raw, unpolished beauty of her spirit. She has absolutely nothing left in this world. No home, no money, no status. Yet she possesses a wealth of forgiveness that money could never buy. Fook's hand, which had been resting inside his pocket, slowly tightens. For the first time in his professional life, he finds himself completely captivated not by power, but by pure, unselfish vulnerability. "Jack, wait," Tu Tien says softly, her voice cutting through the rising tide of her husband's anger. She places a gentle, warm hand directly over Jack's clenched fist. Jack turns his head sharply to look at his wife. His eyes are still fierce, but the moment his gaze meets hers, the hard edges of his expression soften ever so slightly. "Tu Tien, You cannot be on her side for this. This isn't just about charity. This is a matter of safety. If we let them go, we put her and everyone else in danger. Tu Tien doesn't argue. Instead, she slowly sinks to her knees, lowering herself onto the gravel right beside the weeping girl. She doesn't care about ruining her pristine clothes. She reaches out and gently wraps her arms around the girl's shaking shoulders, pulling her close against her chest. The girl buries her face into Tu Tien's shoulder, her loud, breathless sobs echoing against the stone walls. "I am not on the side of the criminals, Jack," Tu Tien says, looking up at her husband, with eyes full of profound wisdom and deep emotion. "But I am looking at her. Look at her heart, Jack. It is completely untainted by the filth they threw at her. They tried to turn her into a monster of hatred, but she chose to remain a flower of wild grace. If we force justice upon her terms, we might punish them, but we will crush her spirit. We will force her to bear a guilt she isn't strong enough to carry." Jack stares at his wife, his breath catching. He looks at the homeless girl, then back at Tu Tien. He can see the profound truth in her words. Vengeance is easy. Punishment is a simple equation. But healing? Healing requires something far more complex. It requires stepping back from the ledge of anger. A heavy silence descends upon the courtyard once more. The distant rumble of thunder rolls across the dark sky, signaling that the rain is finally arriving. A few cool drops begin to fall, splashing lightly against the dry stones. Jack looks down at his phone. The screen is still glowing. His fingers remain frozen. He looks at Uncle Dung, whose expression has shifted from fierce aggression to a quiet, contemplative sorrow. Uncle Dung slowly lowers his arms, though his posture remains vigilant, keeping a sharp eye on the two captives. The two criminals remain completely still, their heads bowed low, their faces flushed with a sudden, overwhelming shame. They had expected blows. They had expected handcuffs, prison cells, and a lifetime of ruin. They never expected to be shielded by the very soul they had tried to destroy. The sheer weight of her mercy hits them harder than any physical strike ever could. "Please, Jack," Tu Tien whispers again, her eyes pleading for the life of the girl's conscience. "Let love guide us today, not anger." Jack closes his eyes for a brief moment, taking a long, deep breath to steady the storm raging inside his chest. When he opens them, the fierce, blinding rage has faded, replaced by a cold, commanding authority. He lowers his phone and slides it back into his pocket. The homeless girl lets out a sharp gasp, looking up at him with a glimmer of hope breaking through her tears. "They will not go to jail today," Jack announces, his voice ringing out across the courtyard like a gavel striking a desk. The two criminals lift their heads, a collective sigh of relief escaping their lips, but Jack instantly cuts them off with a razor-sharp glare. "Do not mistake this for weakness. You are not being freed because you deserve it. You are breathing free air right now solely because this girl possesses a heart that you are completely unworthy of." Jack turns his head toward his assistant. "Fook, get the legal documents from the car. Now." Fook snaps out of his trance immediately. "Yes, sir," he replies, his voice steady but filled with a newfound urgency. He moves quickly, his footsteps echoing sharply as he runs toward the vehicle parked just outside the gate. Within moments, he returns with a leather folder, a heavy pen, and a set of official binding agreements. Jack takes the papers from Fook, his eyes locked onto the two men on the ground. "You will sign a full, legally binding restrictive covenant right now," Jack states coldly. "You will forfeit every claim, every right, and every connection to this woman. If you ever come within a 3-mile radius of her, if you ever utter her name, if you so much as look in her direction again, these papers will automatically trigger an immediate, non-negotiable arrest warrant. I will personally ensure you spend the maximum sentence behind bars, without the possibility of bail. Do you understand me? The abusive husband nods frantically, his hands shaking so violently he can barely hold the pen that Phuc hands to him. Yes, yes, sir. We understand. We will sign. We will never come back. We swear it. With Uncle Doong standing over them like a silent judge, the two men hastily press the pen to the paper, signing their names with trembling strokes. Every stroke of the pen is a severing of the chains that had bound the homeless girl to her horrific past. Once the signatures are finalized, Phuc carefully takes the documents back, checking them over with a meticulous eye before nodding toward Jack. "It is done, sir." Phuc murmurs, his gaze lingering for a fraction of a second on the young woman, who is now slowly rising from the ground with Tu Tien's help. Jack looks at the two criminals one last time. "Get out of my sight," he commands, his voice dripping with utter disdain. "And pray you never cross our path again." Uncle Doong steps aside, releasing his grip completely. The two men do not waste a single second. They scramble to their feet, their bodies hunched over in humiliation, and flee through the iron gates, disappearing into the gathering rain without once looking back. The shadows they brought with them seem to leave the courtyard as they run, leaving behind a clean, open space. The homeless girl stands in the center of the yard, her body completely spent. As she realizes that the threat is gone, that she is finally, completely safe, a different kind of sob breaks from her throat. It is no longer a cry of terror, but a massive, overwhelming release of years of bottled-up pain, suffering, and fear. She buries her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving. But she is no longer alone in the cold. Tu Tien steps forward, gently pulling the girl's hands away from her face. She takes those small, calloused hands into her own warm palms. "It's over now," Tu Tien says, her voice a soothing balm against the girl's tattered soul. "The past cannot hurt you anymore. You don't have to run. You don't have to hide on the streets." Jack walks over, his massive frame standing beside his wife. He looks down at the girl, his expression completely transformed into one of quiet respect. He reaches out, placing a firm, reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You showed more strength today than those men will ever possess in their entire lives," Jack says softly. "A heart like yours deserves a home. From this day forward, you are under our protection. You have a place with us." Little Anna steps closer, her initial fear completely forgotten. She reaches out and gently takes hold of the edge of the girl's faded cardigan, looking up at her with a bright, beautiful smile that radiates pure warmth. The simple, innocent gesture from the child breaks the last remaining wall of sadness in the girl's heart. The homeless girl looks at the faces surrounding her, Jack's protective stance, Tu Tien's loving embrace, Uncle Doong's supportive nod, and Phuc's quiet, deeply admiring gaze. For the first time in as long as she can remember, she doesn't feel like a discarded remnant of the world. She feels seen. She feels valued. As the gentle summer rain begins to wash away the dust from the courtyard stones, the small group moves together toward the warmth of the house. The wild rose, bruised and battered by the harshest storms, had refused to let its thorns become poisonous. And in that act of pure, unselfish mercy, it had finally found the fertile soil where it could truly bloom, surrounded by a family born not of blood, but of an unbreakable, healing love.